She was the billionaire's business partner, until one late meeting changed their lives. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew exactly what they were thinking before she even walked through those glass doors. The morning sun cast sharp lines through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Rhodes and Lancaster Strategic, 42 floors above Manhattan's bustling streets. Danica Rhodes adjusted her charcoal blazer one final time before stepping into the elevator, her reflection catching her eye in the polished steel. 35 years old, and she still felt the weight of every gaze that followed her through corporate hallways. The elevator hummed as it climbed toward the executive floor. Danica's fingers traced the edge of her tablet, reviewing the morning's agenda. 3 client presentations, 2 strategy sessions, and 1 partnership review with Roman. Always Roman. "Good morning, Ms. Rhodes." Her assistant, Melody, appeared the moment the elevator doors opened, coffee in hand and schedule ready. "Mr. Lancaster requested to move your 10 o'clock to 9:30. Something about the Morrison account." Danica accepted the coffee. Black, no sugar, the way she'd trained herself to drink it years ago. Sweet things were for people who had time for indulgence. Did he say why? Just that it was urgent. Melody's tone carried the same careful professionalism that everyone used when discussing Roman Lancaster. Respectful, cautious, as if his name itself commanded attention. Walking through the open-plan office, Danica nodded to her team. Young strategists hunched over laptops, senior analysts debating campaign metrics, account managers juggling client calls. This was her world, the empire she'd built one presentation at a time, one late night at a time, one no she'd turned into a yes at a time. But as she approached the glass-walled conference room where Roman was already seated, something felt different today. Maybe it was the way the morning light hit his silver hair, or how he seemed to be staring at something beyond the window, instead of his usual stack of reports. "You're early," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Roman Lancaster looked up, and for just a moment his expression was unguarded, tired maybe, or thoughtful in a way that had nothing to do with quarterly projections. "The Morrison deal is falling apart. Straight to business. Always straight to business with Roman." Danica opened her tablet, fingers already moving to pull up the Morrison files. "What happened? They want to pull out. Something about our approach being too calculated." Roman's fingers drummed against the mahogany table, a rare display of restlessness from a man who usually moved with surgical precision. Their exact words were that our strategy felt emotionally disconnected. Danica felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The Morrison account represented 8 months of work, countless late nights, and a breakthrough into the luxury hospitality market they'd been targeting for years. Emotionally disconnected. Apparently, our consumer psychology research was flawless, our market positioning was brilliant, but Roman paused and Danica noticed how his jaw tensed slightly. "But they said it felt like we were analyzing their customers instead of understanding them." The words hung in the air between them. Danica set down her stylus, really looking at Roman for the first time that morning. His navy suit was immaculate as always, his steel-grey eyes as sharp as ever, but there was something in his posture, a slump so subtle anyone else would have missed it, that spoke of a man questioning something fundamental. "We've built our reputation on data-driven strategies," Danica said carefully. "Our analytics are what set us apart." "I know." Roman's voice was quiet. "But when I was on the phone with Morrison yesterday, he said something that's been bothering me. He said, I can't shake the feeling that you two understand business perfectly, but you've forgotten what it feels like to be human." The observation landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Danica's carefully constructed composure. She'd spent years perfecting the art of professional detachment. Emotions were messy. Emotions were unpredictable. Emotions were the luxury of people who didn't have to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously in rooms full of men who looked nothing like her. "Since when do you care what clients think about our humanity?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Roman met her eyes directly, something he'd been doing less and less lately, she realized. "Since I started wondering if he might be right." Before Danica could respond, Melody's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Rhodes, the Hartwell team is here for the 9:45. The moment shattered. Roman straightened, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Danica gathered her materials, her mind already shifting to the next presentation, the next challenge, the next wall to climb. But as she stood to leave, Roman's voice stopped her. "Danica." She turned back, and for just an instant, she saw something vulnerable flicker across his features. "Do you ever wonder what we might be missing?" The question followed her out of the conference room and into the rest of her day. Through client meetings, where she delivered perfectly crafted pitches, through strategy sessions, where she analyzed consumer behavior with surgical precision, through lunch eaten at her desk while reviewing competitor research, and later that evening, as she stood alone in her office watching the sun set behind Manhattan's skyline, Danica found herself thinking about masks, about the armor she wore every morning along with her blazer and heels, about the careful distance she maintained from everything that might make her seem less than completely in control. She thought about Roman's question, and for the first time in years, she didn't have a strategic answer ready. What were they missing? The city lights began to twinkle below, and Danica realized she had no idea how to find out. Have you ever wondered if by building the perfect professional armor, you might be missing out on the chance to experience something truly real? Danica and Roman have mastered the business world, but have they forgotten how to connect with their own hearts? Some conversations change everything, even when they start with spreadsheets. 3 days had passed since Roman's question lingered in the air between them, and Danica found herself stealing glances at him during meetings, the way his pen paused mid-signature when he was deep in thought, how his shoulders tensed whenever someone mentioned emotional connection in their presentations. Small details she'd never noticed in 2 years of partnership. The Hartwell campaign had been approved, but the Morrison account remained a ghost, haunting their quarterly projections. Roman had been unusually quiet during their morning briefings, his responses clipped and professional. Yet Danica caught him staring out the window more often, his mind somewhere far from profit margins and market shares. It was Thursday evening when everything shifted. Danica was reviewing the quarterly analysis in her office when Melody knocked softly. "Ms. Rhodes, Mr. Lancaster asked if you could stop by his office before you leave. He said it's about the Cypress Industries proposal." The executive floor was nearly empty by 7 p.m. Danica's heels echoed against the marble as she walked toward Roman's corner office, her reflection multiplying in the darkened windows of abandoned workstations. His door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. She found him standing behind his desk, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, staring at a wall covered in sticky notes and strategy diagrams. The usually pristine office looked like a hurricane of ideas had blown through it. "You wanted to see me?" Danica stepped inside, noticing how different he looked without his armor of formal attire, more human somehow. Roman turned, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes, not the kind that came from long hours but from wrestling with something deeper. "I've been thinking about what Morrison said, about understanding people instead of just analyzing them." Roman, "No, let me finish." He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I pulled our client retention data from the last 5 years. Our success rate is impressive, but our client satisfaction scores have been declining steadily. Not enough to hurt business, but enough to notice." Danica joined him at the window, the city sprawling beneath them like a circuit board of light and shadow. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we've become so good at predicting what people will do that we've forgotten to care about why they do it." Roman's voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "When did we stop seeing our clients as people with stories and start seeing them as demographics with spending patterns?" The vulnerability in his tone caught her off guard. This was Roman Lancaster, the man who'd built a digital empire before 30, who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals with the emotional range of a chess master. Yet here he stood, questioning the very foundation of their success. "You're talking about changing our entire approach," Danica said carefully. "I'm talking about remembering what we lost along the way." Roman turned to face her, and in the dim office lighting, his features seemed softer somehow. "Do you remember why you started your first agency? Before the awards, before the recognition, before any of this?" The question hit unexpectedly deep. Danica found herself thinking back to her tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn 8 years ago, working 16-hour days not for profit margins, but because she genuinely wanted to help small businesses tell their stories, when every client was a person with a dream, not just a revenue stream. "I wanted to give voices to people who weren't being heard," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "And I wanted to create technology that actually improved people's lives, not just their efficiency metrics." Roman's smile was rueful. "Somewhere along the way, we got really good at building walls, professional walls, emotional walls. Strategic walls. Walls keep you safe, Danica said automatically. The response so practiced, it felt hollow even as she said it. Do they? Or do they just keep you isolated? The question hung between them as Roman moved to his desk, pulling out a thick file folder. I've been researching something. Remember Thorne and Associates? That boutique firm that beat us on the Riverside Hotel's bid last month? Danica nodded, remembering the sting of that loss. They'd had superior analytics, better market research, more impressive credentials. Yet Riverside had chosen a smaller, less established firm. I called Riverside's CEO Camille Hendricks yesterday, asked her why. Roman opened the folder, revealing printed emails, interview transcripts, and handwritten notes. She said something interesting. She said Thorne's team didn't just present a strategy, they told her a story. About her guests, about moments of connection, about the feeling she wanted people to have when they walked into her hotels. That's just good presentation skills, Danica said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they rang false. Is it? Or is it the difference between understanding data and understanding people? Roman pulled out a photograph, a candid shot of hotel guests laughing in a lobby. Thorne's junior associate, Nia Winters, spent 3 days at Riverside Properties, not analyzing foot traffic patterns or revenue per room, just talking to guests, learning their stories. Danica stared at the photograph, something stirring in her chest. And she discovered that their highest-rated experiences weren't about amenities or service efficiency. They were about moments when guests felt genuinely seen. The concierge who remembered a guest's coffee order, the housekeeper who left origami flowers for a child staying with divorced parents, the bartender who listened to someone's job interview anxiety and created a confidence cocktail just for them. Roman. Danica's voice was softer now, because she could see where this was leading, and it terrified and excited her in equal measure. I know it sounds naive. I know it challenges everything we've built here. But what if Morrison was right? What if we've become so focused on predicting human behavior that we've forgotten how to connect with human hearts? Roman moved closer, and Danica could smell his cologne, something woody and warm that she'd never consciously noticed before. I spent last weekend at my nephew's birthday party, watching kids play, seeing how they connect with each other without strategy or calculation, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt that kind of genuine joy about anything. The confession landed between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Danica found herself studying Roman's face in the lamplight, really looking at him, perhaps for the first time since they'd become partners. The sharp angles that had always seemed so assured now revealed something more vulnerable underneath. What are you asking me, Roman? He was quiet for a long moment, fingers drumming that familiar rhythm against his desk. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with business decisions. I'm asking if you'd be willing to try something different, something that might fail spectacularly, something that might make us look foolish to our competitors and naive to our investors. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. I'm asking if you'd be willing to remember what it feels like to care about our work and our clients as more than just strategic challenges. Danica felt something crack open in her chest, a hairline fracture in the professional composure she'd spent years perfecting. The woman who'd fought to be taken seriously, who'd learned to speak in data points and profit projections, found herself remembering the girl who'd once believed business could be both successful and soulful. It's risky, she said quietly. The best things usually are. And as Roman smiled, a real smile, unguarded and hopeful, Danica realized that somewhere between quarterly reports and client presentations, she'd stopped taking the kinds of risks that made her feel alive. Maybe it was time to remember how to be brave in a completely different way. Sometimes the most dangerous decision is the one that makes you feel alive. The Riverside Hotel's research consumed the next 2 weeks. Roman had convinced Danica to implement what he called the Hendricks experiment, a radical departure from their data-driven approach that involved actually spending time with clients as people, not just revenue sources. Danica found herself in places she'd never imagined visiting for business purposes. A coffee shop in Queens, where their client, Enzo Marcelli, served regulars who knew each other's names. A community bookstore in Brooklyn, where owner Vera Castellanos hosted weekly poetry readings. A food truck in Central Park, where proprietor Diego Ramirez remembered customers' favorite orders and asked about their children. This feels completely unscientific, Danica murmured into her phone as she sat on a park bench, watching Diego hand a free cookie to an elderly woman who'd been coming to his truck for 3 years. Roman's voice crackled through her earpiece. How does it feel, though? The question stopped her. Feel? When had Roman Lancaster started asking about feelings? It feels... She paused, watching the woman's face light up over a simple gesture. It feels like I'm remembering something I'd forgotten. What's that? That business is about people. Real people with real stories. Danica pulled out her notebook. Not her tablet, but an actual leather-bound notebook she'd bought on impulse that morning. Diego just told me about a customer who comes here every Tuesday with her teenage daughter. They're working through the daughter's anxiety about college applications. He started keeping her favorite tea in stock, even though he only sells coffee, because those Tuesday conversations happen over tea. And I realized that's not just customer service. That's care. Genuine human care. Danica felt something shift in her chest. When was the last time we advised a client to care about their customers as individuals, not demographics? Roman was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. What would our old selves think about this conversation? They'd think we'd lost our minds. Danica laughed, and the sound surprised her. Light, unguarded. 2 weeks ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting in Central Park taking notes about a food truck owner's emotional intelligence, I'd have questioned their sanity. And now? Now I'm questioning my own sanity, but in the best possible way. That evening, Danica returned to the office with pages of handwritten notes and a head full of stories. She found Roman in the conference room, surrounded by what looked like a completely different kind of presentation. No charts, no graphs, just photographs and quotes and handwritten observations. How did your day go? He asked, looking up from what appeared to be a sketch of a coffee shop layout. Unexpectedly enlightening. Danica set her notebook on the table, acutely aware of how informal it looked next to their usual stack of tablets and printed reports. I interviewed 12 business owners today, not about their profit margins or customer acquisition costs, but about moments they felt genuinely connected to the people they serve. Roman leaned back in his chair, and Danica noticed he'd loosened his tie, another small crack in his usual formal armor. Tell me about the most surprising one. There's this bookstore owner, Vera. She told me about a customer who comes in every Friday afternoon and buys a mystery novel. Same genre, same routine for 2 years. Last month, the woman mentioned she was going through a divorce. Danica opened her notebook, finding the page where she'd captured the story. Instead of just recommending another mystery, Vera started curating a selection of books about resilience, self-discovery, healing. She didn't make a sales pitch about it. She just quietly placed them where her customer would see them. Did the woman buy any? She bought all of them. And last Friday she brought Vera a thank you card saying those books helped her remember who she was outside of her marriage. Danica looked up from her notes to find Roman watching her intently. That's not marketing strategy. That's intuition. That's caring enough to pay attention. Roman stood and moved to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. What if we built our next presentation around stories like that? Not case studies or market research, but actual human moments of connection. You mean lead with heart instead of data? I mean integrate both. Use stories to reveal the emotional truth, then support it with data that proves why emotional connection drives loyalty, referrals, and long-term profitability. Roman started writing on the board, his handwriting bold and decisive. What if we proved that caring isn't just good ethics, it's good business? Danica joined him at the whiteboard, picking up a red marker. We'd need a pilot client, someone willing to let us experiment with a completely different approach. I have someone in mind. Roman's smile was conspiratorial. Remember Keenan Thorne from the Morrison presentation? The guy who said our strategy felt emotionally disconnected? You want to go back to him. I want to show him we've learned something. Roman added bullet points under his initial notes. What if we pitched him not just a marketing strategy, but a philosophy, a way of thinking about his customers that starts with understanding their stories? Danica felt a familiar flutter of excitement, the same feeling she used to get in her Brooklyn studio when she was building something new from scratch. But this excitement was different, warmer somehow, more collaborative. That's either brilliant or career suicide, she said. Maybe both. Roman capped his marker and turned to face her fully. Are you willing to risk it? The question hung in the air between them, and Danica realized they weren't just talking about business anymore. This wasn't just about changing their marketing approach. It was about changing who they were as partners, as professionals, as people. She looked at Roman, really looked at him, and saw something she'd never noticed before. Behind his sharp suits and sharper strategies was someone who was tired of playing it safe, someone who wanted to build something meaningful, not just profitable. "There's something I should tell you," Danica said, surprising herself with the admission. "Oh, what's that? I've been dreading coming to work for months, not because I don't love what we've built, but because somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling connected to it, to any of it." She set down her marker, her fingers slightly trembling. "I became so good at being professional that I forgot what it felt like to be passionate." Roman was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she'd never heard before. "I bought a penthouse apartment last year. Floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, view of the entire city. And you know what I realized when I moved in? What? I had no idea how to make it feel like home. I could design the perfect living space, optimize the lighting, select furniture based on aesthetic principles and resale value, but I couldn't make it feel like a place where someone actually lived." Roman's laugh was rueful. "I think I've been doing the same thing with my life, optimizing everything except the parts that actually matter." The confession landed between them like a bridge neither had planned to build. Danica felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with professional admiration and everything to do with recognizing a kindred spirit. "So we're both admitting we've forgotten how to feel things?" she asked softly. "Maybe. Or maybe we're admitting we're ready to remember." Roman stepped closer, and Danica could see flecks of gold in his grey eyes she'd never noticed before. The conference room felt smaller suddenly, the space between them charged with possibility. "This changes things," she whispered. "Does it scare you?" Danica considered the question, her heart beating faster than it had during any high-stakes presentation. "Terrifying someone as controlled as me? Absolutely," she smiled, feeling bolder than she had in years. "But maybe that means it's exactly what I need." And for the first time in months, the risk felt worth taking. The most dangerous conversations happen in the silences between what's said and what's felt. The Morrison pitch was scheduled for Friday morning, giving them 3 days to prepare what Roman called the most honest presentation of our careers. But as Wednesday afternoon stretched into evening, Danica found herself more aware of Roman's presence than the PowerPoint slides they were supposedly refining. He'd moved from his usual spot across the conference table to the chair beside her, ostensibly to better see her laptop screen, but the shift had created an intimacy that made every accidental brush of their hands electric. "The Vera story should come after the data about customer lifetime value," Roman said, leaning closer to point at her screen. His sleeve was rolled up, and Danica noticed a small scar on his wrist she'd never seen before. "It demonstrates the emotional foundation that drives those numbers." "Right." Danica tried to focus on the presentation, but Roman's cologne was making it difficult to concentrate on customer retention strategies. "What about the Diego example? Should that be in the implementation section?" "Actually," Roman paused, his finger still hovering over the laptop's trackpad. "Danica, are we really talking about slide organization right now?" The question caught her off guard. She looked up to find him watching her with an expression that was both amused and serious. "What do you mean?" "I mean, for the last hour, we've been having 2 completely different conversations. One about business strategy and another," he trailed off, but his eyes didn't leave hers, "another about whatever this is happening between us." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Danica felt her pulse quicken, that familiar flutter of panic that came whenever someone called attention to something she'd been trying to ignore. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said automatically, the professional deflection as smooth as ever. Roman smiled. Not his polished boardroom smile, but something softer and more knowing. "You've reorganized the same slide 3 times in the past 10 minutes, and unless customer journey mapping has suddenly become fascinating enough to make you bite your lip like that, I'd say your mind is somewhere else entirely." Heat rose in Danica's cheeks. She hadn't realized she was being so transparent. "Maybe I'm just nervous about tomorrow's presentation." "Are you? Or are you nervous about the fact that we've been sitting close enough to touch for 2 hours, and you've been thinking about it the entire time?" The directness of his observation stole her breath. This was Roman Lancaster, the man who discussed quarterly projections with the same emotional range as ordering coffee, calling out an attraction that she'd been desperately trying to pretend didn't exist. "Roman," she started, but he held up a hand. "Before you give me the speech about professionalism and appropriate boundaries, let me ask you something." He saved her document and closed the laptop, giving her his full attention. "When was the last time someone made you feel genuinely curious about them? Not impressed, not attracted to their success or status, but curious about who they are when nobody's watching?" The question was so unexpected that Danica found herself answering honestly. I don't remember. I've been thinking about that conversation we had last week, about walls and isolation. Roman turned in his chair to face her completely. I realized something. I've spent years perfecting the art of being impressive, but I've never learned how to be interesting, to myself or anyone else. You're plenty interesting, Danica said, then immediately regretted the admission. Am I? Or am I just successful? Roman's smile was rueful. There's a difference, you know. Success is what you achieve. Interesting is who you are underneath all the achievements. Danica felt something crack open in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced during their late-night conversation weeks ago, but stronger now, more insistent. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the first person in years who's made me want to figure out the difference. Roman's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Danica's breath catch. And because I think you might be wrestling with the same question. She was. God, she was. Danica had built an identity so thoroughly around professional accomplishment that she'd almost forgotten there might be anything else worth exploring. But sitting here with Roman, seeing the vulnerability he was willing to share, she felt like a door was opening to a version of herself she'd thought was lost forever. This is complicated, she whispered. The best things usually are. Roman echoed his words from their previous conversation, but this time they carried a different kind of promise. Can I tell you something that might sound crazy? Danica nodded, not trusting her voice. I've been partners with you for 2 years. I've watched you negotiate impossible deals, solve problems that stumped our entire team, command rooms full of executives twice your age. I've always known you were brilliant. He paused, his eyes searching her face. But it wasn't until a few weeks ago that I realized I had no idea who Danica Rhodes actually is when she's not being brilliant. The observation hit deeper than it should have. And you want to know. I want to know everything. What makes you laugh when you're alone? What you were like before you learned to be so careful with your words? What you dream about when you let yourself stop thinking strategically for 5 minutes? Roman's voice was barely above a whisper now. I want to know the person behind the presentation. Danica felt tears threaten, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, really seen perhaps for the first time in years. That person, she's been buried under a lot of professional armor. Maybe she doesn't have to be anymore. The silence that followed felt different from their usual comfortable working quiet. This was charged, pregnant with possibility and danger in equal measure. Danica could feel herself standing at the edge of something that would change everything, and she wasn't sure if she was brave enough to jump. We have rules about this kind of thing, she said finally, grasping for the safety of professional boundaries. We have rules about a lot of things, most of which we wrote to protect ourselves from taking risks. Roman leaned back in his chair, but his eyes never left hers. The question is, are those rules serving us or are they just another kind of wall? Before Danica could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Melody. Building security is doing their final rounds. Should I tell them you're staying late? Reality crashed back in. The presentation tomorrow. The Morrison account. The careful professional relationship they'd spent 2 years building. All of it suddenly felt fragile, balanced on the edge of a conversation that could either elevate their partnership to something extraordinary or destroy everything they'd worked for. We should probably call it a night, Danica said, reaching for her laptop. Big day tomorrow. Roman nodded, but he made no move to gather his things. Danica, yeah? Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we decide about this, he gestured to the space between them, I want you to know something. This conversation, these past few weeks of actually talking to each other, really talking, it's been the best part of my year. The admission landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through every carefully constructed boundary Danica had built around her heart. She felt herself teetering on the edge of saying something that would change everything, words that were pushing against her lips with dangerous insistence. Instead, she stood and gathered her materials, falling back on the safety of action over emotion. Thank you, Roman. That means more than you know. As she walked toward the elevator, Danica could feel his eyes on her back, and for the first time in her carefully controlled adult life, she found herself wishing she had the courage to turn around and walk back into the conversation that scared her most. But some bridges, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. Sometimes the most important presentations have nothing to do with business. The Morrison pitch was flawless. For 90 minutes, Danica and Roman wove together data and stories, analytics and humanity, creating something neither had achieved alone. Keenan Morrison and his team leaned forward, asked questions, smiled at the right moments. By the time they concluded with Vera's bookstore story, the room felt electric with possibility. "This is completely different from your usual approach," Morrison said, his fingers drumming thoughtfully against the conference table. "When Roman called last week, I'll admit I was skeptical about giving you another shot." Danica felt Roman tense beside her, though his expression remained composed. "We understand your hesitation, Keenan. Our previous presentation focused on market penetration rather than market connection." "Exactly." Morrison's assistant Indira Kamal pulled out a tablet and began taking notes. "This approach feels more authentic, like you actually understand our customers as people, not just purchasing patterns." "That's because we spent the last 3 weeks learning how to see them that way," Danica said, glancing at Roman. Something passed between them, a shared pride in the work they'd done, the risks they'd taken together. Morrison noticed the exchange, his eyes moving between them with renewed interest. "There's something different about your dynamic, too. More collaborative. The energy between you two feels less corporate, more human," Roman suggested. "Yes, exactly that," Morrison smiled. "Look, I'm going to be direct. Your original pitch was technically superior to anything else we saw, but it felt cold, calculated, like you were selling to us rather than partnering with us." He gestured to the presentation materials scattered across the table. "This feels like partnership." 2 hours later, they were walking out of Morrison's building with a signed contract and the largest account in their firm's history. The November air was crisp, Manhattan bustling around them, but Danica felt like she was floating 6 inches above the sidewalk. "We did it," she said, stopping in the middle of the crowded sidewalk. "We actually did it." Roman turned to face her, his professional composure finally cracking into a grin that transformed his entire face. "We more than did it. We revolutionized our entire approach and landed the account of a lifetime. Is this what it feels like to take risks that actually pay off? I have no idea. This is completely new territory for me too." Roman's laugh was bright, unguarded. "What do you want to do? Celebrate? Call the team? Update our quarterly projections?" The questions hung in the air, but Danica found herself studying Roman's face in the afternoon sunlight. His hair was slightly mussed from running his hands through it during the presentation. His tie was loose, his jacket unbuttoned. He looked less like the polished executive she'd worked beside for 2 years and more like a person. A person she was rapidly realizing she cared about in ways that had nothing to do with business. "Actually," she said, surprising herself, "I want to do something completely impractical, such as have a conversation that has absolutely nothing to do with work." Roman's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "That's a dangerous proposition, Danica Rhodes." "Why?" "Because once we start talking about non-work things, we might discover we actually like each other. And then where would we be?" The question was light, teasing, but Danica heard the genuine curiosity underneath. "I guess we'd have to find out." Roman checked his watch, then looked back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "There's a coffee shop around the corner from here. Completely unremarkable place. No business networking, no strategic discussions allowed. Just coffee and conversation. Just coffee and conversation." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a tiny cafe that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Mismatched chairs, chipped mugs, the kind of place that served coffee in ceramic rather than paper cups. Danica couldn't remember the last time she'd been somewhere so deliberately unimpressive. "This is surreal," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug for warmth. "I don't think I've had a non-work coffee in months, maybe years." "I know the feeling." Roman stirred sugar into his cup, the small ritual seeming oddly intimate in the quiet cafe. "Can I ask you something personal? We're in uncharted territory anyway. Go ahead. What did you want to be when you were 7 years old?" The question caught her completely off guard. 7? That's oddly specific. 7 is before you learn to be practical, before you start editing your dreams based on what's realistic or profitable. Roman leaned back in his chair, genuinely curious. 7-year-old dreams are pure ambition. Danica found herself smiling at the memory. "I wanted to be a story detective." "A what?" "I made up this job where I would travel around and collect people's stories. Not like a journalist, but more like an archaeologist of experiences. I thought everyone had at least one story that was worth preserving, and my job would be to find it and make sure it didn't get lost." Roman was quiet for a moment, his coffee forgotten. "That's beautiful. And kind of exactly what we ended up doing these past few weeks, isn't it? Collecting Diego's story, Vera's story, Enzo's story. I hadn't thought of it that way, but Danica felt something click into place. A connection between her childhood dreams and adult reality that she'd never recognized. God, you're right. I became a story detective after all. I just got sidetracked by profit margins for a few years. What about you? She asked. 7-year-old Roman wanted to be an inventor, but not of things, of experiences. I used to design elaborate scenarios for my action figures, not just battles or adventures, but emotional journeys. I'd create these complex narratives about friendship and loss and redemption. Roman's smile was self-deprecating. My parents thought I'd grow up to be a screenwriter. Instead, you became a digital innovator who creates user experiences. Same dream, different medium. I never thought of it that way. Roman looked genuinely surprised. How did you see that when I couldn't? Maybe it takes someone else to recognize the through line in your story. The words settled between them, carrying more weight than either had intended. They were talking about childhood dreams, but something deeper was happening, a recognition of who they were beneath the professional personas they'd constructed. Can I tell you something? Roman's voice was quieter now, more tentative. Of course. This morning before the presentation, I was terrified. Not about the pitch, I knew we'd prepared something good. I was terrified that if we succeeded, if this new approach worked, I'd have to admit that the last few years of my professional life were built on the wrong foundation. Danica felt her chest tighten. And now? Now I'm terrified for a completely different reason. Roman met her eyes directly. I'm terrified that this conversation, this connection we're building, might be the most important thing that's happened to me in years. And I have no idea what to do with that. The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge half built, waiting for someone to decide whether to complete the crossing or retreat to safer ground. Danica felt her heart racing, every instinct screaming at her to deflect, to make a joke, to steer the conversation back to safer territory. Instead, she reached across the small table and placed her hand over his. Roman? Yeah, I'm terrified too, but maybe being terrified together is better than being safe alone. His fingers intertwined with hers, and for the first time in years, Danica felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes the most important contracts are the ones you sign with your heart. The hardest battles are fought between what you want and what you think you should want. 3 days after the Morrison celebration, Danica found herself staring at her reflection in the office bathroom mirror, trying to understand the woman looking back at her. Same professional blazer, same carefully styled hair, same composed expression. But something fundamental had shifted, and she wasn't sure if the change was visible to everyone else or just impossible for her to ignore. The hand-holding moment in the cafe had lasted exactly 47 seconds. She knew because she'd counted every one of them, memorizing the warmth of Roman's fingers, the way his thumb had traced across her knuckles, the moment when they'd simultaneously realized what they were doing and pulled apart with nervous laughter. 47 seconds that had completely rewritten the rules of their partnership. You're avoiding him, she said to her reflection. It wasn't a question. For 3 days, she'd perfected the art of professional distance, arriving late to meetings so Roman was already seated, scheduling back-to-back client calls to avoid extended conversations, communicating through melody whenever possible, all while maintaining the facade that nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The bathroom door opened and Melody entered, stopping short when she saw Danica at the mirror. Oh, sorry, Ms. Rhodes, I didn't realize. Melody paused, studying Danica's reflection with the keen observation of someone who'd worked closely with her for 2 years. Are you okay? You've seemed different this week. Different how? Distracted, maybe? Or like you're thinking about something important? Melody moved to the sink beside her, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Is everything all right between you and Mr. Lancaster? The energy in the office has been weird since the Morrison presentation. Danica felt heat rise in her cheeks. What do you mean? I mean, he's been asking about your schedule constantly, where you are, when you'll be back, if you're available for meetings, and you've been... Melody gestured vaguely. Well, you've been acting like someone who's trying really hard not to be in the same room as someone else. The observation hit closer to home than Danica cared to admit. We're just busy with different projects. Melody nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Well, just so you know, he's been asking for you. Again, he wants to discuss the Thorn Industries follow-up whenever you have a chance. Thorn Industries? The hospitality chain that reached out after they heard about the Morrison campaign? They want to schedule a consultation. Melody checked her phone. Mr. Lancaster has been trying to set up a planning meeting with you since Tuesday. Guilt twisted in Danika's stomach. She'd been so focused on avoiding personal conversations with Roman that she'd neglected actual business responsibilities. The success of their new approach was generating exactly the kind of attention they'd hoped for, and she was sabotaging it because she couldn't handle her own emotions. "Tell him I'll meet with him at 4, she said, making the decision before she could second-guess herself. In the conference room, in his office. If they were going to have this conversation, whatever this conversation turned out to be, it needed to happen somewhere private. An hour later, Danica stood outside Roman's office door, her heart beating, as if she were about to deliver the most important presentation of her career. Through the glass, she could see him at his desk, jacket hung over his chair, sleeves rolled up, completely absorbed in whatever he was reading. She knocked softly. "Come in." Roman looked up, and his entire expression brightened when he saw her. "Danica, finally." "I'm sorry I've been—" she started, then realized she didn't have a professional way to finish that sentence. "Avoiding me." Roman's smile was gentle, understanding. "I noticed. I wasn't—" "Yes, you were, and I understand why." Roman gestured to the chair across from his desk, but instead of sitting behind it in his usual position of authority, he moved to the other chair beside hers. "Can we talk about what happened at the cafe?" Danica felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "Roman, I think we should focus on the Thorn Industries opportunity. Melody said they're interested in—" "Danica." Roman's voice was quiet but firm. "We can't pretend our way back to the way things were before. Something changed between us, and avoiding each other isn't going to change it back." She knew he was right, but admitting it felt like stepping off a cliff. "Things are complicated now. They don't have to be." "Yes, they do." The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "Roman, we built something important together. Our partnership, our reputation, our business. And now we've discovered we actually like each other as people, not just professionals. How is that a bad thing? Because liking each other as people leads to other things. And other things lead to complications. And complications lead to—" Danica struggled to find the words for her deepest fear. "What happens if this doesn't work out? What happens to everything we've built?" Roman was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an expression that was both tender and serious. "What happens if it does work out?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Danica had spent so much energy imagining worst-case scenarios that she'd never allowed herself to consider the alternative. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "Neither do I. But I know something else." Roman leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying a conviction that made her breath catch. "I know that what we created in that Morrison presentation wasn't just good business strategy. It was two people bringing out the best in each other. It was partnership in the truest sense of the word. Roman, I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I'm not asking you to risk everything we've built on the possibility of something we don't understand yet." Roman's eyes never left hers. "I'm just asking you to stop avoiding the conversation. Stop pretending that nothing has changed when everything has changed." Danica felt tears threaten, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of someone finally naming the truth she'd been running from. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of wanting something I can't control. Of caring about someone in ways that don't come with guarantees or exit strategies." She laughed shakily. "I've spent my entire adult life building safety nets, and you're asking me to consider something that has no net at all." Roman reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand. The same gentle touch from the cafe, but more deliberate this time. "I'm not asking you to jump without a net, Danica. I'm asking if you'd be willing to build the net together." The metaphor landed with surprising force. Danica looked down at their joined hands, feeling the steady warmth of his palm against hers, and realized that maybe safety wasn't about avoiding risk. Maybe it was about finding someone trustworthy enough to take risks with. "What would that look like?" she whispered. "I don't know. Maybe it looks like dinner that isn't about client development. Maybe it looks like conversations that don't end with action items." Roman's thumb traced across her knuckles, the same gesture from 3 days ago, but slower now, more intentional. "Maybe it looks like admitting that the best part of my day is when you walk into a room, and it has nothing to do with your quarterly projections." The confession stole her breath. Danica had spent years perfecting the art of professional appreciation, recognizing colleagues for their skills, their achievements, their contributions to the bottom line. But Roman was talking about something completely different, something personal and unquantifiable and terrifying. "The Morrison presentation," she said suddenly. "What about it? When we were presenting together, there was this moment when you were talking about customer connection, and I was building on your point about emotional authenticity." Danica paused, trying to find words for something she'd only half understood in the moment. It felt like we were thinking with the same mind, like we were creating something neither of us could have made alone. Roman's smile was soft, understanding. "I felt it too. I keep thinking about that feeling, wondering if—" She trailed off, afraid to complete the thought. "Wondering if that kind of connection might be possible outside of conference rooms?" "Yes." The admission was barely a whisper. Roman lifted their joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so gentle and unexpected that Danica felt something inside her chest crack open completely. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "we should find out." And for the first time in years, the scariest possibility felt like the one most worth exploring. Sometimes the most important negotiations happen over dinner and wine. Friday evening found Danica standing in front of her bedroom mirror for the third time in 20 minutes, questioning every choice she'd made about the simple black dress that suddenly felt either too formal or too casual or too something. She couldn't remember the last time getting dressed had felt this complicated. It wasn't a business dinner. It wasn't a networking event. It wasn't even a celebration of a successful client acquisition. It was, Roman had said when he'd asked her that morning, just dinner between two people who'd like to get to know each other better. Just dinner. As if anything involving Roman Lancaster could ever be just anything. Her phone buzzed. "Downstairs whenever you're ready. No rush." Danica grabbed her purse, checked her reflection one more time, and decided that overthinking her appearance was probably not the best way to start an evening dedicated to authentic connection. If Roman was interested in getting to know the real her, he might as well start with someone who occasionally spent 20 minutes deciding what to wear. She found him waiting by his car, not the sleek black sedan he used for client meetings, but a navy BMW that looked like it was chosen for comfort rather than impression. He was wearing dark jeans and a charcoal sweater, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him in professional settings. "You look beautiful," he said simply, opening the passenger door for her. "Thank you." Danica slid into the seat, acutely aware of how different this felt from their usual shared car rides to client presentations. "So, where are we going for this just dinner?" Roman smiled as he started the engine. "Somewhere that serves food but isn't trying to impress anyone. I figured we've had enough impressive meals in impressive restaurants with impressive people." 20 minutes later, they were seated across from each other in a small Italian restaurant in the village that looked like it had been family-owned for generations. Checkered tablecloths, wine served in actual glasses instead of stems, and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged long conversations rather than quick business transactions. "This is perfect," Danica said, looking around at the warm lighting and casual decor. "How did you find this place?" "My nephew Caspian recommended it. He's 22, works as a line cook in Brooklyn, and has very strong opinions about authentic Italian food." Roman opened his menu, but his attention remained on her. He said, "It's the kind of place where you go to actually taste your food, not to be seen eating it." "Smart nephew." "He is. Much smarter than I was at his age. Probably smarter than I am now, in some ways." Roman's expression grew thoughtful. "He's the one who pointed out that I've been living like someone who's afraid to have experiences that can't be optimized." Danica felt a familiar flutter of recognition. "What do you mean?" "I mean, every restaurant I usually choose is selected for its potential business networking value. Every vacation is scheduled to maximize relaxation efficiency. Every relationship—" Roman paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Well, I haven't had many relationships, but the few I've attempted were with women who fit seamlessly into my professional life." "And how did those work out?" "They didn't. Because it turns out that when you choose people based on how well they complement your existing life, you never actually have to grow or change or become anything more than what you already are." Roman set down his menu and looked directly at her. "And I've realized I want to become more than what I already am." The admission landed between them with surprising weight. Danica felt her chest tighten, not with anxiety, but with recognition of someone else wrestling with the same questions that had been keeping her awake at night. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" she said. "Please do." "I Googled how to have a non-business conversation yesterday." Danica felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I've become so used to talking about strategy and objectives and quarterly goals that I wasn't sure I remembered how to just talk to someone. Roman's laugh was warm, delighted. What did Google suggest? Ask about hobbies, family, travel experiences, basic getting-to-know-you questions. Danica picked up her wine glass, using it as a prop to manage her nervousness. But then I realized I don't have many hobbies besides work. I keep my family conversations pretty surface level, and my last vacation was a business conference in Chicago. So, who are you when you're not being Danica Rhodes, strategic mastermind? The question was gentle but direct, and Danica found herself really considering it. Who was she outside of conference rooms and client presentations? When had she last done something purely because it brought her joy, not because it served a professional purpose? I think, she started slowly, I used to paint watercolors. In college, I had this tiny studio apartment with terrible lighting, and I'd sit by the window on Sunday mornings and paint whatever I could see outside. Nothing good, nothing worth showing anyone, just colors on paper because I liked the way they looked together. When did you stop? When I realized that the time I spent painting could be better spent building my portfolio, networking, establishing my professional reputation. The words tasted bitter as she said them. I convinced myself that hobbies were a luxury I couldn't afford if I wanted to be taken seriously. Roman was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in his glass. Do you miss it? I never let myself think about missing it. But, Danica paused, surprised by the emotion that rose in her throat. Yeah, I think I do. I think I miss the person who thought it was worthwhile to spend a morning making something beautiful just because she could. What would that person think of who you've become? It was a dangerous question, the kind that could unravel years of carefully constructed self-identity. But sitting across from Roman in the warm lighting of a restaurant, chosen for authenticity rather than status, Danica found herself willing to consider it. I think she'd be proud of what I've accomplished, but I think she'd be sad about what I gave up to accomplish it. Danica met Roman's eyes directly. What about you? What would 22-year-old Roman think of the man sitting across from me? He'd probably be impressed by the success, the recognition, the financial security, but he'd be confused about why none of it feels like enough. Roman leaned forward slightly. He'd wonder when I decided that being admired was more important than being known. The confession hung between them, heavy with years of choices that had led them both to this moment. Successful, respected, and somehow fundamentally lonely, despite being surrounded by colleagues and clients and industry connections. Can I ask you something personal? Danica said. That's kind of the point of tonight. When you were a kid, before you learned to be strategic about everything, what made you really happy? Roman smiled, and for a moment Danica saw a glimpse of who he might have been before he learned to calculate the professional value of every interaction. Building things with my hands, not digital things, actual physical things. I had this incredible collection of Legos, and I'd spend hours creating these elaborate cities, not following the instruction manuals, just creating whatever felt right. Do you still build things? Not the way I used to. Everything I build now has to serve a purpose, generate revenue, solve a business problem. Roman's expression grew wistful. I can't remember the last time I created something just because it felt good to make it exist. Their server appeared to take their order, but neither had looked at their menus beyond the initial glance. They ordered automatically, pasta, salad, whatever, their attention entirely focused on the conversation that was slowly dismantling years of professional armor. Roman? Danica said after the server left. Yeah? I'm really glad we're doing this. This conversation, this dinner, this whatever this is. She gestured between them. I didn't realize how much I'd missed talking to someone who actually wants to know what I think about things that don't involve profit projections. I was just thinking the same thing. Roman reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that was becoming natural between them. Danica, can I tell you what I've been thinking about since our conversation in my office yesterday? Tell me. I've been thinking that maybe the most important thing we could build together isn't another successful campaign or another impressive client portfolio. Roman's thumb traced across her knuckles, the touch both comforting and electric. Maybe the most important thing we could build is a life that makes both of us want to get up in the morning. The words settled between them like a promise neither had expected to make on a first date. Danica felt tears threaten, not from sadness, but from relief at hearing someone articulate a hope she'd been afraid to acknowledge. Maybe success wasn't about climbing higher. Maybe it was about finding someone worth standing still with. The most dangerous moment in any relationship is when you realize you're already falling. 2 weeks after their dinner at the village restaurant, Danica found herself in unfamiliar territory. She was happy, not professionally satisfied, not strategically pleased with quarterly outcomes, but genuinely inexplicably happy in ways that had nothing to do with business metrics. Roman had started leaving small notes on her desk. Not strategic memos or meeting requests, but observations about their clients that made her laugh, or thoughts about conversations they'd had over coffee. Yesterday's note had simply said, "Saw someone painting in Washington Square Park this morning and thought of your watercolors. Maybe Sunday morning light is the same everywhere." She'd read it 3 times before tucking it into her desk drawer next to the growing collection of others. "You're glowing," Melody observed as she delivered Danica's afternoon coffee. "I don't mean that metaphorically. You're actually glowing. New skincare routine?" Danica looked up from the Thorn Industries proposal she was reviewing, acutely aware that Melody's observation was more accurate than she'd realized. She'd been catching glimpses of herself in mirrors and windows lately, surprised by the woman looking back, relaxed, animated, more present than she'd been in years. "I've been sleeping better," she said, which was true. The insomnia that had plagued her for months had mysteriously vanished around the time she and Roman had started having conversations that lasted well past business hours. Melody's smile was knowing. "And I suppose this improved sleep has nothing to do with the fact that you and Mr. Lancaster have been leaving together every evening this week." Heat rose in Danica's cheeks. She hadn't realized their routine was so obvious to the office staff. After official business hours ended, she and Roman had fallen into the habit of extended strategy sessions that gradually morphed into personal conversations, which led to dinner, which led to long walks through Manhattan while they talked about everything except work. "We've been collaborating on the new client approach," Danica said carefully. "Right, collaborating." Melody set down the coffee with a gentle smile. "Well, whatever kind of collaborating you're doing, it's working. The whole office energy feels different. More human, I guess." The observation lingered in Danica's mind as she returned to the Thorn Industries proposal. More human. It was exactly what Keenan Morrison had noticed about their presentation. The shift from corporate efficiency to genuine connection. But now it wasn't just affecting their client relationships. It was transforming the entire culture of their firm. Her phone buzzed with a text from Roman. "Emergency meeting in conference room B, 5 minutes." Danica's pulse quickened. Emergency meetings usually meant client crises, contract disputes, or competitive challenges that required immediate strategic response. She gathered her materials and hurried to the conference room, her mind already cycling through potential problems and solutions. She found Roman standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, and something about his posture suggested this wasn't a typical crisis meeting. "What's the emergency?" she asked, closing the door behind her. Roman turned, and she saw immediately that his expression wasn't one of professional concern. It was something else entirely, nervous, excited, vulnerable in a way that made her breath catch. "I need to tell you something, and I couldn't wait until after work to say it." Danica's heart began racing for reasons that had nothing to do with client emergencies. "Roman, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, everything's—" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of uncertainty she'd never seen from him in professional settings. "Danica, these past few weeks, the conversations, the dinners, the way we've been working together, it's changed something fundamental for me." "What do you mean?" Roman moved closer, and she could see the intensity in his eyes, the vulnerability he was no longer trying to hide. "I mean, I've spent my entire adult life building walls between my professional success and my personal happiness, keeping them separate, manageable, controllable." He paused, searching her face. "And then you came along and made me realize that maybe the most successful thing I could do is stop separating them entirely." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Danica felt something shift in her chest, part excitement, part terror, all overwhelming. "Roman, let me finish." He stepped closer still, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "Yesterday, when we were walking through Central Park and you were telling me about your college roommate, Quincy, and her terrible poetry, I realized something. I realized I was memorizing everything you said, not because it was strategically useful, but because I wanted to know every story that made you who you are." Danica felt tears threaten. And this morning, when I was in a board meeting with investors, all I could think about was whether you'd find the presentation boring or brilliant, what you'd add to make it better, how your laugh sounds when you find something genuinely funny rather than professionally appropriate. Roman's voice was quieter now, more intense. Danica, I've fallen in love with the way your mind works, the way you see problems and opportunities, the way you make everything more interesting just by paying attention to it. The confession landed like lightning, illuminating everything between them with sudden, brilliant clarity. Danica felt her carefully constructed professional composure crumble entirely, leaving her standing in a conference room with a man who'd just articulated feelings she'd been afraid to acknowledge, even to herself. "You're in love with my mind," she whispered. "I'm in love with all of you. Your mind, your laugh, the way you bite your lip when you're thinking through complex problems, the way you've started humming under your breath when you're happy." Roman reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture so tender it made her knees weak. "I'm in love with the woman who wanted to be a story detective, and the woman who built a strategic empire, and every version of yourself you've shared with me." Danica felt something break open in her chest, not painful, but like a dam releasing water that had been held back too long. She'd spent years perfecting emotional control, professional distance, strategic thinking that prioritized outcomes over feelings, but standing here with Roman, seeing the absolute sincerity in his expression, she realized that some things were more important than control. "Roman," she said quietly, her voice shaking slightly, "I think I've been falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me." His smile was radiant, transformative. "What terrifies you about it?" "Everything. The way you make me want to be more honest than I've ever been with anyone. The way I've started making decisions based on what feels right instead of what's strategically optimal." She laughed shakily. "The way I bought watercolors yesterday for the first time in 8 years because you mentioned Sunday morning light." Roman's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Danica, what if being strategic about everything except this one thing is exactly what we need?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we approach this relationship, this love, with the same commitment and intentionality we bring to everything else we build together, but without trying to control the outcome?" Roman's eyes searched hers. "What if we decided to be strategic about creating space for something uncontrollable?" The paradox was so perfectly Roman, analytical and romantic in equal measure, that Danica found herself laughing through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Are you suggesting we develop a strategic plan for falling in love?" "I'm suggesting we acknowledge that we already have fallen in love, and now we get to decide what we want to build with that love." Roman leaned his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "I'm suggesting that maybe the most important business we've ever conducted is the business of learning how to be happy together." And then, because words had finally reached their limit, Danica rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was nothing like the controlled, strategic decisions she'd spent years perfecting. It was impulsive, overwhelming, and absolutely perfect. Roman's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and for the first time in her adult life, Danica Rhodes stopped thinking entirely and just felt. Some contracts are signed with signatures. Others are sealed with kisses that change everything. Love is easy in conference rooms. The real test comes when the whole world is watching. 3 weeks after the kiss that changed everything, Danica and Roman were about to face their first public test as something more than business partners. The annual Strategic Marketing Summit, the industry's most prestigious event, was being held at the Grand Hyatt, and Rhodes and Lancaster Strategic had been invited to present their revolutionary, human-centered approach to an audience of 500 marketing executives, potential clients and competitors, including Sloan Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell and Associates, their biggest rival. "Are you ready for this?" Roman asked as they stood in the hotel elevator, ascending to the presentation floor. He was wearing his sharpest navy suit, but Danica could see the nervous energy in the way his fingers drummed against his briefcase. "Are we talking about the presentation, or about presenting as whatever we are now?" Danica smoothed her burgundy dress, chosen because Roman had once mentioned it was his favorite color on her, a detail that would have been irrelevant 6 months ago and now felt essential. "Both, I guess." Roman's smile was rueful. "I've given hundreds of presentations to rooms full of executives, but I've never given one where half my attention was going to be on not staring at my business partner like I'm completely gone for her." Heat rose in Danica's cheeks. Their relationship had evolved into something beautifully complicated over the past 3 weeks. Stolen kisses in empty conference rooms, dinners that stretched until midnight, mornings that started with coffee, and ended with Roman's hand in hers as they walked into the office together. But this was their first major public appearance since everything changed, and the weight of professional scrutiny felt heavier than usual. "We'll be fine," she said, more to convince herself than him. "We've always been good at compartmentalizing." Roman turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Danica, I don't want to compartmentalize anymore. I don't want to pretend that the most important thing in my life is separate from my professional success." He paused as the elevator chimed their arrival at the conference floor. "I want to present this campaign as the people we actually are now, not the people we were pretending to be 6 months ago." The elevator doors opened to reveal a bustling conference hall filled with the kind of high-powered networking energy that usually energized Danica. Today, it felt overwhelming. Conversations about market share and quarterly projections buzzed around them as they made their way to the registration table, but all she could focus on was the way Roman's hand briefly touched the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd, a gesture of protection and connection that felt both thrilling and terrifying in such a public space. Danica Rhodes, Roman Lancaster, the voice belonged to Sloane Hartwell, appearing as if summoned by Danica's anxiety. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of sharp smile that suggested she knew something you didn't want her to know. "I'm looking forward to your presentation today. The entire industry is buzzing about your new approach." Sloane, Roman's professional mask slid into place seamlessly. "Always a pleasure. I have to admit, I'm curious about this sudden shift toward emotionality in your strategy work. Very different from your previous reputation for cold, analytical precision." Sloane's eyes moved between them, assessing. "Change can be so revealing, don't you think?" Danica felt her defensive instincts activate. "Our approach has evolved based on what we've learned produces better outcomes for our clients. The Morrison account, for example, saw a 37% increase in customer engagement after implementing our connection-focused strategies." "Oh, I'm sure it's very effective," Sloane said smoothly. "I'm just wondering what inspired such a dramatic philosophical shift. It's not often that successful professionals completely reimagine their core methodology." Her smile sharpened. "Unless something personal changed their perspective." The implication hung in the air like a challenge. Danica felt Roman tense beside her, and she realized they were at a crossroads. They could deflect with professional talking points, maintain the careful distance that had always protected them from industry gossip, or— "You're right," Roman said quietly, surprising both women. "Something personal did change our perspective." Danica's heart stopped. This wasn't what they'd discussed. This wasn't compartmentalization or professional safety. This was Roman choosing honesty in the most public possible moment. "We discovered that the most effective business strategies come from people who understand what genuine connection feels like," he continued, his voice steady but carrying an undertone that made Danica's breath catch. "It's hard to help clients create authentic relationships with their customers when you've never experienced authentic relationship yourself." Sloane's eyebrows rose. "How philosophical." "How honest," Roman corrected, and something in his tone made it clear the conversation was over. "If you'll excuse us, we need to prepare for our presentation." As they walked away, Danica felt her pulse racing. "Roman, what was that?" "That was me refusing to hide the best thing that's ever happened to me just because it might make other people uncomfortable." Roman stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression intense. "Danica, I know we agreed to keep this professional in public, but I can't stand here and pretend that loving you is separate from being successful. You're not separate from my success. You're the reason I understand what success actually means." The confession, delivered in the middle of a crowded conference hall, stole her breath entirely. Around them, marketing executives continued their networking conversations, oblivious to the fact that Roman Lancaster had just redefined everything she thought she knew about professional boundaries. "People are going to talk," she whispered. "Let them talk. The people whose opinions matter. Our clients, our team, the people who actually care about good work. They're going to judge us on results, not on whatever story Sloane Hartwell wants to tell about our relationship." Roman stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And the people who judge us for building something real together, those aren't people whose respect I need." An hour later, they stood on stage in front of 500 industry professionals, presenting the Morrison case study and their human-centered approach. But something fundamental had shifted. Instead of delivering a polished performance about business strategy, they were telling the story of their own transformation. professional and personal intertwined in ways that made their success inseparable from their connection to each other. The breakthrough came when we stopped analyzing our clients' customers and started understanding them, Danica said, clicking to a slide showing testimonials from Morrison's guests. But that understanding was only possible when we learned to understand each other, as partners, as people, as individuals who brought different perspectives to the same challenge. Roman picked up the thread seamlessly. The most successful partnerships, whether business or personal, happen when two people make each other braver, more creative, more willing to take the kinds of risks that lead to breakthrough results. He looked directly at Danica, and she saw the love in his expression that he was no longer trying to hide. Our clients don't just hire our expertise anymore, they hire our partnership. The presentation was flawless, but more than that, it was honest. They weren't just talking about business strategy, they were demonstrating what partnership looked like when it integrated professional excellence with personal authenticity. When they finished, the applause was sustained, enthusiastic, and Danica realized that their authenticity hadn't weakened their professional reputation, it had elevated it. As they left the stage, Roman caught her hand and squeezed it briefly. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure," she admitted. "Good. That's how I feel about everything important in my life these days." Later that evening, as the conference wound down and they walked through Manhattan toward Roman's apartment, Danica found herself thinking about the conversation with Sloane, the presentation, the moment when Roman had chosen honesty over strategic safety. "Roman," she said as they paused at a crosswalk. "Yeah? I think I'm ready to stop being afraid of being happy with you in public." Roman smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "What changed your mind?" "Watching you choose truth over tactics today, realizing that the person I've fallen in love with isn't someone who hides from difficult conversations. He's someone who faces them with more courage than I knew I wanted in a partner." Danica reached up and straightened his tie, a gesture that was both intimate and bold in the middle of a busy street. "I want to be that brave too." And as the crosswalk signal changed and they stepped forward together, Danica realized that some bridges, once crossed, led to better territory than anything you could see from the safe side. The greatest risk isn't falling in love. It's choosing to stay in love when the world gives you every reason to play it safe. 6 months after the marketing summit, Danica stood in Roman's penthouse apartment, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan in shades of gold and rose, a cup of coffee warming her hands, and a decision weighing on her heart. On the kitchen counter behind her lay 2 envelopes that would determine the trajectory of their future, one containing an offer that could change everything, the other containing a choice that would require them to risk everything. "You're up early." Roman's voice was soft behind her, still rough with sleep. She felt his arms circle her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as he joined her at the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Couldn't sleep." Danica leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his warmth. "Too much thinking. About Wesley's offer?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither had fully voiced yet. Wesley and Partners, the most prestigious strategic consulting firm on the East Coast, had extended an unprecedented offer to Danica 3 days ago. Senior partner, her own division, a salary that would triple her current income, and complete creative control over her projects. It was everything she'd worked toward for her entire career, the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. The only catch, it was in London, for a minimum of 3 years. "Among other things," she said quietly. Roman was silent for a long moment, his arms tightening slightly around her. They'd spent the past 3 days dancing around the conversation that needed to happen, both afraid of what the other might say when forced to choose between career advancement and the relationship that had transformed their lives. "What are the other things?" he asked finally. Danica turned in his arms, studying his face in the morning light. 6 months of loving this man had taught her to read the subtle signs of his emotional state, the slight tension around his eyes when he was worried, the way his jaw tightened when he was trying to stay composed. This morning, she saw both. "I've been thinking about what success actually means," she said. 6 months ago, the Wesley offer would have been the easiest decision I'd ever made. Senior partner at 35, international experience, recognition as one of the top strategic minds in the industry. It checks every box I've ever had for professional achievement. But 6 months ago, I was measuring success by how far I could climb and how much I could achieve independently. I didn't factor in what it might mean to build something with someone else that's more valuable than anything I could create alone. Danica reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Roman, these past months with you, working together, loving together, becoming people we actually like, it's changed what I want success to look like. Roman's eyes searched hers, and she saw hope and fear warring in his expression. What does that mean? It means I need to know something before I make this decision. Danica took a deep breath, preparing to ask the question that had been keeping her awake for 3 nights. If I stay in New York, if I turn down London and we keep building what we've started together, what does our future look like? Not just professionally, but personally. Are we building towards something permanent, or are we just enjoying what we have until something better comes along? The directness of her question seemed to catch Roman off guard. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands moving to frame her face with the same gentle intensity she'd come to associate with their most important conversations. Danica, can I tell you what I realized when you told me about the London offer? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I care more about keeping someone than I do about any business decision or career opportunity or strategic advantage. Roman's voice was steady, but carried an emotional weight that made her breath catch. I realized that losing you would feel like losing the best version of myself, not because I can't be successful without you, but because I don't want to be successful without you. Tears threatened, but Danica held his gaze. Roman, I'm not asking you to sacrifice your career for me. I would never ask you that. But I'm asking if you'd be willing to build a career with me that's bigger than anything either of us could create separately. Roman's thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I'm asking if you'd be willing to take the biggest risk of our lives and see what happens when we stop thinking about our individual success and start thinking about our shared success. What kind of shared success? Roman stepped back, taking her hand and leading her to the kitchen counter where the 2 envelopes lay waiting. Beside them was a 3rd envelope she hadn't noticed before, unmarked and sealed. I've been doing some thinking too, he said, picking up the 3rd envelope, about what it would look like if we stopped trying to fit our relationship into our existing professional structure and started building a professional structure around our relationship. What do you mean? Roman opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers, legal documents, business plans, financial projections. I mean, what if instead of you moving to London or staying in New York to maintain what we already have, we created something entirely new, something that would let us work together anywhere in the world, on our own terms, building the kind of company we've dreamed about since we first started talking about human-centered business strategy. Danica stared at the documents, her heart racing as she began to understand what he was proposing. Roman, is this a business plan for Rhodes and Lancaster Global, an international consulting firm specializing in connection-based strategy with offices in New York, London, and 3 other major cities? Full partnership, shared ownership, and the freedom to take on only the clients and projects that align with our values. Roman's smile was nervous but hopeful. It would mean taking a massive financial risk, leaving behind the security we've built, and betting everything on our ability to succeed together. But it would also mean that no one else gets to determine our priorities or our future. The magnitude of what he was suggesting stole her breath. This wasn't just a business proposal, it was a life proposal, a commitment to building something unprecedented together, professionally and personally intertwined in ways that most people would consider either brilliant or completely insane. This is terrifying, she whispered. The best things usually are, Roman said, echoing the words that had become their unofficial motto. But Danica, I'd rather fail spectacularly with you than succeed safely without you. And I'd rather bet everything on us than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have built together. Danica looked down at the business plan, seeing months of careful research, financial projections that accounted for every possible scenario, contingency plans that demonstrated the same strategic thinking that had made them both successful individually. But underneath all the professional thoroughness was something much simpler and more radical, faith in what they'd created together. There's one more thing, Roman said quietly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Danica's heart stop entirely. I know this is unconventional timing. I know most people don't propose major business partnerships and marriage in the same conversation, but we've never done anything conventionally, and I don't want to start now. He opened the box to reveal a ring that was both elegant and understated, a solitaire diamond set in platinum, classic but not ostentatious, exactly what she would have chosen if she'd ever allowed herself to think about such things. Danica Rhodes, will you marry me? Will you build a company with me? Will you take the biggest risk of our lives and see what happens when we stop holding back and commit completely to this crazy, beautiful, terrifying thing we've created together? The proposal, business and personal intertwined, was so perfectly them that Danica found herself laughing through tears she could no longer hold back. This was Roman Lancaster, the man who approached love with the same strategic intensity he brought to everything else, but who'd learned that the best strategies sometimes meant abandoning strategy entirely in favor of faith. "Yes," she said, the word coming out as barely a whisper. "Yes, to all of it. Yes to the company, yes to marriage, yes to betting everything on us." She reached up to pull his face down to hers. "Yes to building something that's never existed before, because we're brave enough to try." The kiss that followed tasted like coffee and possibility, like Sunday morning light and the promise of every morning after. And as Roman slipped the ring onto her finger, with hands that shook slightly with emotion, Danica realized that the greatest success she'd ever achieved had nothing to do with individual accomplishment and everything to do with finding someone worth building a life with. Outside the windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly, full of opportunities and challenges, and the million small moments that would make up their future together. But for now, there was just this. Two people who'd learned that the most important business decision they'd ever make was choosing to love each other without reservation. And sometimes, the greatest strategic advantage is simply refusing to play it safe. 2 years later, some love stories end with happily ever after. The best ones end with, "And this is just the beginning." The London office of Rhodes and Lancaster Global buzzed with the controlled energy of a successful consultation firm on a Thursday morning in November. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Thames, and the conference room was filled with the kind of passionate discussion that had become the company's signature. Strategy sessions that felt more like collaborative storytelling than traditional business meetings. "The key insight," Danica said, gesturing to a whiteboard covered in client journey maps and emotional connection points, "is that Henley & Sons customers aren't just buying artisanal furniture. They're buying the story of craftsmanship, the feeling of supporting family tradition, the connection to something authentic in an increasingly digital world." Her team, a carefully selected group of strategists from 5 different countries, leaned forward with the kind of engaged attention that still surprised her sometimes. 2 years of building a company culture around genuine human connection had attracted people who understood that the best business strategies began with empathy. "So our recommendation," added Jasper Wilde, their London team lead, "is to restructure their entire customer experience around moments that reinforce that emotional narrative, not just at point of sale, but through delivery, follow-up, even their return policy." "Exactly," Danica smiled, feeling the familiar satisfaction of watching a team develop innovative solutions through collaborative thinking. "Any questions before we present this to the Henley family next week?" As the team gathered their materials and filed out, chattering excitedly about implementation strategies, Danica remained at the whiteboard, adding final notes to their framework. The London office had exceeded every projection from Roman's original business plan, but more importantly, it had become exactly what they'd envisioned. A place where brilliant people did meaningful work that helped clients build authentic connections with the people they served. "Mrs. Lancaster," Danica turned to find Celia Morrison, Keenan's daughter and their newest junior associate, standing in the doorway with a tablet and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Just Danica is fine, Celia. What's got you looking like you're about to burst?" "The Morrison Hotel's quarterly report just came in. Customer satisfaction scores are up 43% from last year. Repeat bookings are at an all-time high and—" Celia paused dramatically. "They want to expand the connection-based approach to all 15 properties across Europe." The news landed with the kind of warm satisfaction Danica had learned to associate with their new approach to success. Not the sharp thrill of beating competitors or landing prestigious contracts, but the deeper pleasure of knowing their work was creating genuine value for real people. "That's incredible news. Have you shared this with Roman yet?" "He's in the New York office today, remember? The Castellanos and Associates presentation." Celia's smile turned knowing. "But I believe he's flying back tonight for your dinner reservation at Enzo's." Heat rose in Danica's cheeks. Even after 18 months of marriage, The staff's gentle awareness of her personal life still caught her off guard sometimes, but it was a good kind of surprise, the warmth of working with people who cared about her happiness, not just her productivity. Right. Well, save the Morrison report for tomorrow's team meeting. This kind of success deserves proper celebration with everyone. That evening, Danica sat across from Roman in the same village restaurant where they'd had their first real conversation as something more than business partners. The checkered tablecloths and warm lighting looked exactly the same, but everything else had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. "Celia told me about Morrison," Roman said, raising his wineglass in a toast. 43% increase in customer satisfaction. I think that officially makes you a genius. Us, Danica corrected automatically. It makes us a good team. Roman's smile was soft, familiar after 2 years of marriage and 4 years of partnership in every sense of the word. I love that you still correct me on that. Someone has to keep your ego in check. Danica clinked her glass against his, then took a sip of the wine he'd chosen. A bottle from the same vineyard they'd visited on their honeymoon in Tuscany, where they'd spent a week deliberately not talking about business and accidentally discovering that they were even better at being married than they were at building companies. Speaking of keeping things in check, Roman reached into his jacket pocket. I have something for you. Roman Lancaster, if you bought me jewelry for a random Thursday in November, I'm going to give you a lecture about strategic resource allocation. It's not jewelry. His smile turned mischievous as he pulled out a small wrapped package. It's something I saw in a shop window this afternoon and couldn't resist. Danica unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a set of professional-grade watercolor paints, the kind she'd dreamed of owning in college, but never allowed herself to buy. The colors were rich and luminous even in the dim restaurant lighting, cadmium yellow, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, all arranged in a compact wooden case that looked well-made and serious. Roman, her voice caught slightly. These are beautiful. There's a note, he said, pointing to a small card tucked under the paint tubes. Danica opened it to find Roman's handwriting, for Sunday morning light, and for the woman who taught me that some things are worth creating just because they're beautiful. Tears threatened, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude of being known so completely by someone who paid attention to dreams she'd shared in vulnerable moments. When did you have time to buy these? You've been in New York all week. I ordered them from that art supply shop near Washington Square Park, the one where you stopped to look at sketchbooks last month when we were walking back from Diego's food truck. Roman reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring. I wanted you to have them for this weekend. Why this weekend? Because this weekend marks exactly 2 years since you turned down the London job at Westley & Partners to build something crazy and impossible with me. Roman's eyes were bright with affection and pride. And I wanted to celebrate the woman who chose partnership over safety, love over strategy, and us over everything else. The observation landed with surprising emotional weight. 2 years. Had it really been that long since they'd stood in Roman's penthouse kitchen, betting everything on their ability to build something unprecedented together? Some days it felt like yesterday. Other days it felt like they'd been partners forever. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd taken that job? She asked. Sometimes. Do you regret staying? Danica looked around the restaurant, at the couple at the next table sharing a dessert, at the elderly man reading alone in the corner, at the servers who moved with the kind of comfortable efficiency that spoke of people who enjoyed their work. She thought about her team in London, passionate and collaborative and brilliant. She thought about their New York office, where Melody now managed operations and young strategists learned that business could be both profitable and humane. She thought about the clients whose stories they helped tell, the customers who felt more connected to the companies they chose to support, the small but meaningful ways their work was making the world a more empathetic place. But mostly she thought about the man sitting across from her, who'd learned to integrate love and work so seamlessly that she couldn't imagine success without him beside her. Not for a single day, she said firmly. Roman, what we've built together, the company, the marriage, this life where we get to wake up every morning excited about what we're creating, it's better than anything I could have imagined when I was planning my career in strategic steps. Even when I leave dirty coffee mugs in the sink. Even when you leave dirty coffee mugs in the sink. Danica laughed, squeezing his hand. Though we should probably discuss your dishwashing strategy when we get home. Is that a professional consultation or a personal one? With us, is there really a difference anymore? Roman's smile was radiant, the expression of someone who'd found exactly where he belonged in the world. I hope there never is. Later that night, as they walked through Covent Garden toward their flat, Danica found herself thinking about 7-year-old dreams and 47-second moments and the 1,000 small choices that had led them to this life they'd built together. The watercolors were tucked safely in her purse, waiting for Sunday morning light and the kind of creative expression that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with joy. "Roman?" she said as they paused at their building's entrance. "Yeah? Thank you for teaching me that the best strategic decision I ever made was learning how to love someone without an exit plan." Roman pulled her into his arms right there on the London sidewalk, kissing her with the same intensity as their first kiss in that conference room 2.5 years ago, but with the added sweetness of promises kept and dreams shared, and a future full of possibilities they'd create together. "Thank you," he said against her lips, "for teaching me that the most successful thing I ever built was a life worth sharing with someone extraordinary." Above them, the city lights twinkled like possibilities, and somewhere in the distance, the Thames kept its ancient rhythm, witness to countless love stories but few as deliberately constructed and passionately lived as the one being written by two people who'd learned that the greatest risk wasn't falling in love. It was choosing to build something lasting with that love, one strategic decision at a time, and they were just getting started. What did you learn from Danica and Roman's story? Would you have the courage to risk everything for love that feels too good to be true? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.